If we are on, hi, I'm Mick Garris, and we are here to celebrate the new movie, The Vigil, with the writer-director, Keith Thomas, with the star, Dave Davis, and with the producer, Raphael Margules. So thank you all for being here. It's Dave, you're sideways. um, so we've had a lot of religious horror movies, primarily in the very Christian and very Catholic terms, with omens and exorcists and the like. And it turns out that this Jewish horror film is indeed an exorcism of a kind, the exorcism of guilt and shame and fear. And I would love to find out, Keith, where that started. It feels personal. It hurts. It has pain and emotion that is quite deep and beautifully dramatic and well represented, unlike what people would call a horror film. So I'd love to find out where the roots are, where that came from.
Yeah. No, thank you so much. And it's a real pleasure to be talking to you. It's personal. It kind of, this movie is, a conglomeration of things going, decades back. It's funny, there's something about Jewish mysticism in terms of studying Kabbalah that says you have to be over 40 and have a family to even enter into it, to even understand it. And that's almost the way I approach filmmaking, is over 40, have a family, have had a career before this. And it took this long for me to find the avenue and the way to kind of express myself in a film that I wanted to do. And so, right, there's a lot of personal themes that, just for whatever reason have resonated with me. At the same time, it's, a combination of my background and kind of my education, things I'd studied, my love of horror film and horror fiction. And then also there's a mercenary element in that I knew that when I wanted to make my first film, it was going to have to be something personal and something that I thought I hadn't seen before. And so when I sat down to write it, it was like, well, what haven't I seen? I've seen a few movies that dealt with Jewish themes that are horror,
Right.
like
There's a golem
Dybbuk boxes, right? Ancient golem movies from 100 years ago, or Dybbuk boxes. Some family finds a Dybbuk box on a yard sale lawn, and then they open it up, and oh no, you've got a Dybbuk in the house. But those families typically not Jewish, so I thought, let's make something truly Jewish through that lens, and let's kind of push into this world in terms of the practice and orthodoxy.
Right. I'm being reminded to remind the audience that the Q&A box is where you'll ask your questions at the bottom of the screen, and then we will go into those. We'll be chatting here for 30, 45 minutes. Dave, as the star of this movie, you are not just the star of this movie, you're in every damn scene. And half of them, at least, 3/4, you're alone. So tell me about the weight. We know you from Walking Dead. We've seen you in True Detective and other things. Tell me about carrying that weight and the collaboration with a writer-director who is the creator of the source material, and what that communication was like, and what that felt like.
Well, it's really a perfect follow-up question to your first question, because when Keith and I first started talking, I asked him all the questions that I normally like to ask, which are, why is this important? Why does this story need to be told? Why now? Why is this particular character's journey relevant, important? Why is it the defining moment of his life? And Keith, from the jump, was just incredibly open and sharing with me about, the places that this story came from. And from the first time I read the script, I knew it was something I had to do. And the same way that Keith, I love how you call it mercenary work, because it's like, what did you say exactly? What needs to be done or what hasn't been done before? And I think of it the same way of like, what haven't I done before? And here's this incredible challenge of, various languages, a community that I'm not well versed in, a character whose journey involves the darkest, scariest moments.
And you make it feel very personal too, because the role of the actor is to convey from the inside out. and the audience to take it from the outside in. And the performance is pretty spectacular because there's such a broad range. And then we discover the mental disabilities and incapacities and all of these elements that make for a very complex character.
Yeah, you know, I think in a lot of ways the story is very unique and very extreme in the subject matter, in the subject of American culture and Jewish culture, in the horror world and the idea of demons and these sort of incredible events. And yet at the same time, it's a very common story. It's you know, struggles with mental health, it struggles with trauma, it struggles with family and community. And for those reasons, Yakov, I mean, I just immediately connected with him, and I wanted to try to bring my own understanding of those things to a people, a community, a, a, a demon that hasn't had that exposure before.
Well, there's also a transition from orthodoxy to something, a real world that's out there that you've not experienced before. And I think that kind of, it's almost claustrophobia exploding into the opposite of claustrophobia, what the character has to face. Keith, tell me about the intent of that when you created the character and how it evolved when Dave became involved.
Yeah, no, it always been this sort of very raw, emotional character, and I love the idea of a character in crisis, someone in crisis. That's like the most interesting character, and I love the idea of starting in the crisis. It's not right after crisis ended or right when it's beginning. It is going to be, you know, we're right there with him as he's enduring this dark night of the soul and stepping across the threshold into this crucible that house is. So from the beginning, it was always this character in this, you know, in this difficult moment. And it's weird. You have a gut thing in terms of in your head when you're writing a script, and then when I was storyboarding and just thinking of who this person was, you have a sort of an image in your head. You obviously put yourself in there, but I had been, you know, I had been looking for this Yakov, and I talked to a lot of really great actors, people who had a lot of really interesting experience in terms of coming from that community and being in that world. And you know, I've told this story before, but it was really kind of a profound moment in that I took a break from casting because I wasn't finding that exact Yakov, and I knew, as I told Rafi in the beginning, there are 3 locations in this film. There's the house, there's Brooklyn, and there's my lead actor's face. And that location is crucial. We're not going to get this thing across unless we see that. And I just happened to be flipping through some streaming service, and I came across this film, Bomb City, which is set in Texas in the 80s. It's about a punk rockers who have fights with locals, and some of them died. True story. And Dave Davis plays the lead, and he has a 3-foot green mohawk. But the minute I saw the way he wore his performance, I said to Rafi, I said, this is the kind of guy that I need. If we can get somebody like that sitting in the chair, like, then we'll be able to read this emotion. So Rafi said, why don't you contact him? I mean, it helps that my Judar went off, and I was like, I know that guy's Jewish. I could tell. And I was right. Even though Dave and I both have non-Jewish names, you know, at the, you know, on the surface. Anyway, so, you know, it was really, once I had found Dave, in the sense that I found him, he was always there, but it was just us kind of coming together. Then it really took on a life of its own, because then I said, this guy matches. This is the thing that I've been seeing in my head, and this is the person. And then it was, you know, Dave came out early to the shoot, and we just immersed ourselves in it, both in the community and in the Yiddish, and then in the, you know, in the sort of trying to dig into the emotional depths that we were going to have to tackle.
I think the first thing we did when I got out there was go out for some kosher,
We did.
little local deli.
Yeah.
And Rafi, you've been with this from the beginning. So tell me a little bit about the journey of concept to script to actually getting the movie made and then ultimately released. unmute yourself.
Thank you.
Okay.
Keith's manager gives us a call and he says, I have a horror script that only you guys can make. So we run a company called Boulder Light Pictures, and my partner and I are both Orthodox. So he was totally right. And we read the script and it was great. And we called up Keith and we were totally on the same page creatively as Keith. And we basically said to Keith, if we're going to go down this rabbit hole, if we're going to make a Jewish horror movie, what I like to say is we're going to make the Jewish horror movie. It's going to be the Jewish horror movie to end all Jewish horror movies. Because we always see, not only in the horror genre, but in other genres, like Orthodox Judaism is represented in sort of cliches, or specifically the ultra-Orthodox community is represented as victimizing or demonizing. So we were like, we're going to go all in and objectively just tell the story of Yakov going through this experience with empathy. So we worked with Keith a bit on the script, and again, we were just always on the same page the whole time. And then I think, what was it, Keith? Maybe 6 months later, we were in production in Brooklyn. But Keith's from Denver, Colorado, and lives there. And naturally, he had initially set the script in Colorado, and we all had the idea of like, okay, like let's set this in the most Jewish place on earth, and in Brooklyn, and let's not shy away from the Yiddish. And let's cast as many actually ex-Hasidic actors as possible. And you know, production was great. We shot it in, I think, 18 days in and around Brooklyn. We shot the exterior stuff in Williamsburg and in Flatbush, and all of the interior stuff was in Sheepshead Bay in Brooklyn as well. And it was just a wonderful experience. And then we premiered at TIFF 2019, and then we were supposed to premiere in South by Southwest of 2020, and obviously that was like the first big event to be canceled by the pandemic. And then finally, almost 1 year after that, the movie is being released in the States. It's actually been released internationally. It's been released around the world. The U.S. is one of the last territories to be releasing the film, courtesy of IFC Midnight this Friday. So we're really excited. It's been a long time coming.
That's pretty great. So Dave, you were not a part of this culture, and I agree, Keith, that the personality of Brooklyn is a huge part of what this movie is. So tell me about how foreign you were to this community, Dave, and how deeply you immersed yourself into it.
Well, yeah, it's really amazing because, you know, I'm Jewish, and I made my bar mitzvah in New Orleans, which is where I was raised.
Oh, wow.
But when I was younger, my family had a lot of roots in New York and around New York, Philadelphia, New Jersey, and originally New York, though. So the more I started to dive into it, the more I realized that it really, in a way, you know, I haven't done one of those genetic websites or anything like that recently, you know, but I don't think I've said it before like this. I don't know. I'm sorry, I'm getting all tongue-tied. Let me put it this way. My great-grandfather owned a bar in Brooklyn. So now these are two different ideas. The from or owning a bar. You know, I mean, of course, everybody drinks. We love drinking in Judaism. However, they clearly took a different approach to Americanization. The more I started to learn about the community and the more I started to delve into the character of Yakov, the more I realized, though, wow, a lot of this culture has been maintained through my grandparents, through my parents, and down to me, even though I didn't know it yet. And the more I started to learn the Yiddish, the more I started to go, I know these words.
Yeah.
This is incredible. I would hear it and I would go, hey, wait, you don't need to translate that. I already know what that means. Why do I know what this means? And I would leave set at the end of the day. I'd call my parents, go, do you know that this is what this word means? And they'd go, yeah, I know what that means. Did you know it's Yiddish? And they go, I guess so. But it wasn't. It was just, that's us. So that was a huge moment of insight for me into Yakov, because that really bridges the gap. On the surface level, you think, this is an extreme culture. This is something that we're not familiar with. You know, in at least, look, me raised in New Orleans, that's not very close by to me, even having made my bar mitzvah and being a Reformed Jew. But the more I got to know these incredible people, and Malky was there introducing me, and I just got to meet everybody and really dig in, like you said, the more I realized exactly how much we all have in common.
Yeah, Dave, Keith, so much of this is motivated by pain. The whole thing is motivated by pain, not just guilt, but pain. And it feels so lived in. What is the pain that motivated you to write this particular story?
Mm. It's interesting. It comes from a combination of, I think, just kind of philosophical, religious struggle in terms of kind of finding my way and figuring out the world. It also comes from, there's so many different aspects to it. But, before being a filmmaker, I was in clinical research. And the research that I did was in nursing homes with demented people. And seeing, it's interesting. Obviously, in the Miss Litvak character, that's a direct sort of pull in terms of watching folks with dementia kind of unravel. But it's really profound. And I think there's a certain, obviously, for families that have loved ones who have dementia and kind of watch this take place with a loved one and see their personality kind of disappear, it's incredibly painful. And so it was kind of both that sort of thing in terms of just generally exploring kind of existential topics. A lot of it was, if you're going to be sitting in front of a dead body for 5 hours, what's going to go through your head? And we've got this character.
Have you sat shomer before?
No, I have not. I've got a lot of friends and family members who have, and I've talked to a bunch of folks who have. I have spent time, I mean, this sounds very morbid, but I have spent time with dead bodies in the, both family member and also just when I was working in healthcare. And it's, when you're in the presence of death, it's incredibly transcendent in a way, obviously, as it should be. And, I think a lot of this was born of that experience of I was, at the birth of my children, which is a very beautiful, transcendent moment. And I'd always kind of assumed death and dying was, maybe the opposite, right? The non-beautiful, the horrible thing we all try to avoid. And yet, having been at someone's bedside as they died, it was just as transcendent. And it was just as kind of remarkable and beautiful in a way. And so a lot of that stuff, that sort of the fear and the sort of guilt associated with that, and then the kind of pain of enduring those emotions, that really filtered its way into the story and into Yakov. And then there's the bigger umbrella of kind of Jewish suffering and historical suffering, and how pogroms and then the Holocaust and anti-Semitism, which I think all of us who are talking here who are involved in the film all have firsthand experience of. If it's going to be set in that world, we're going to have to address that as well.
Rafi, this is a film I would love to have seen at a festival with an audience. We're in the days of virtual release. Coming out Friday, there will be some theaters, but mostly people are going to see it on their screens, whatever that may be. Tell me about the frustration of not being able to share this with the Overlook, for example.
Oh yeah, well the Overlook's great. I mean, we were really fortunate in that we were able to play TIFF in 2019, which was the second to last, followed by Sundance, a major film festival that happened before COVID hit. So we got to, thankfully, we're really grateful. We got to experience that. It was all of our first time at TIFF. And obviously the TIFF midnight crowd is one of the funnest crowds there is out there. So we were able to experience that, which was amazing. So we're really grateful for that. Obviously, and then we were supposed to go to South by, which would have been great. The movie was supposed to come out shortly after. Listen, I mean, I'm a theatrical purist. I don't think it's incomparable to watch a movie anywhere else, but in theaters, especially a horror movie or a comedy, but mostly a horror movie, because of that collective experience of just being in a crowd with people and going on this scary journey of tension, and it's so fun, and just, you can't replicate that outside of a theater. And I hope we're all back in theaters really soon. But if you're watching it at home, I'd say just turn it up as loud as it can go and make sure the lights are off, and try to watch it in one sitting. It's less than 90 minutes.
I have to tell you, I watched it at home last night with a few people, 3 people who hadn't seen it before, and 2 people who had. One of them was myself. We turned out the lights. We got some popcorn. There were screams happening. It was really a joy. Like, I hadn't seen it in about a year, and I was nervous because it's an intense film. And everybody, there was one moment, I don't remember what moment, I wish I did, but I was gripping my girlfriend so tight, and I just remember thinking, I've seen this movie before, but this is completely involuntary right now.
Yeah, my
A
wife and
scary
I
movie
watched.
will scare you at home too.
Absolutely. My wife, but you're right about how it should be seen. My wife and I saw it for the second time today, and we have an 86-inch screen and surround sound and the whole thing. And technically, it is such a beautiful film that deserves to be on a 60-foot screen. And the surround mix, the score is really not a score until the very end. There's no melody there. It's all beautiful surround sound that wraps you into this environment and experience. And so see it in the best technical way possible, because Keith, the way you put this together is so polished in every regard. I mean, some of the photography reminds me of some of the things Mario Bava did with the contrasting primary colors, and a little bit of Polanski influence here and there. But it is technically as good as it is emotionally, and it really should be seen that way. I'm going to take some audience questions here. Let's see. For non-Jewish members of the audience, could you explain the significance of Yakov's outfit, so to speak, going into the final confrontation with the Mizek?
Yeah, so I think, we can all kind of tackle that. So what he's doing is he's putting on something called tefillin, or tying tefillin, as it's said. And it's essentially, these are leather straps that you're seeing, leather straps around his arm and around his hand, tied in a particular way, and then around his head with the little leather box. And it contains a prayer that it is said in the text that is something that you should always have at the forefront of your mind, something you should always be thinking about. This is kind of the core of Judaism. And so this tefillin makes it literal. You are literally binding it upon your hand and putting it before your eyes in this box. And it's something that is practiced very widely. It can be both public and intimate, when you rise up and when you lay down. And at that moment, when I was writing the script, I knew I needed this sort of battle moment, this kind of going in with armor. And of course, the first thing that popped into my head was Evil Dead 2 and Ash putting the chainsaw in his hand. And I thought, when I first wrote it, that was in my head of like, you dolly in on these Dutch angles and just kind of do this thing. But it just didn't seem to fit thematically. But still, that was there. It was still this sort of putting on armor in order to face your fear, to face this thing. And so, what's the crucifix in Judaism? Like, what's the symbol? Like, what's the thing that you could use for that? And so tefillin, we kind of came along to tefillin, and when we filmed that scene, it was actually quite moving and powerful. I think for all of us, because it's a kind of profound religious act and ritual.
Well, Dave, making that physicalizing what's going on had to have helped in your performance and how you approach that.
Yeah, I mean, it was a lot of fun. It felt like armor. It felt like my sword and shield. And also, correct me if I'm wrong, but the Shema, which is what I was saying in the final scene, which was an interesting battle in itself, because the accent with which it was being said was so, the Hebrew actually ended up being more difficult for me in the film than the Yiddish, because the Yiddish almost sort of felt normal to me. I was like, yeah, I get it. The Hebrew, it was a new accent that I was unfamiliar with prior to. And the Shema is also what's inside of the tefillin, correct? And also inside of mezuzahs as well. And I believe
it's a prayer.
It's also,
that's right. It's the kind of the watchword of the faith. It's the foundational prayer.
And it's sort of the prayer when you confront death as well, isn't it?
It's just a very powerful prayer. It's kind of that central prayer of the monotheistic religion. And
it's the
it is. And it's, so we talked to rabbis about, if you're going to have a showdown with a demon in a dark hallway, what are you going to say? Like, what's the prayer? What are you going to do? And so that's kind of where the tefillin came from, and lighting a candle, and this sort of imagery that I think we see a lot in Christian iconography horror films, in terms of like a crucifix and holy water.
And I think that the
And
Shema
idea, we wanted
such a
to
beautiful
drop.
prayer.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Well,
Go ahead.
the tying of the tefillin too was a whole journey of learning it and feeling connected to that. And the prayer of the Shema is so powerful to say. Yeah, I mean, it's a really beautiful prayer.
We wanted to just drop just the tefillin being kind of the climax of all the stuff we were kind of throwing at the audience, but we wanted to just take an audience and drop them into this world where you're just going to experience this subculture as it is objectively, and not explain anything. You know, you're just going to go along on this journey with Yakov, and if it's authentic, which it is, you know, you'll be happy with what you're saying.
Well,
and you won't have too many questions.
So, Rafi, you have said you are Orthodox. Keith and Dave, are you men of faith?
Yeah, I would say so. I'm not practicing, for example, the way Rafi is, but I have studied in a seminary. I'm not a rabbi, but I have a master's degree in religious education, and it's something that I've found very rich, and kind of a lot of the vigil kind of comes from that. It's interesting. My work in my master's thesis was very much a combination of my love of horror and this kind of theological stuff, in that my master's thesis was on monsters in the Torah. So it was about the Nephilim and Leviathan and those sorts of things. And so it kind of felt natural that this would be kind of a culmination of all that.
Big change. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry, Dave.
No, that's all right. I don't need to go off on a religious tangent, but what I was going to say is that, this story really is an exploration of that. And it's an exploration of how we deal with faith on a personal level versus a level in which society and the world and our parents hand it to us. And, is it even escapable if you want it to be? And I think that's really, was a pleasure to explore in the film.
Did this immersion into it cause you to come out the other end of the movie a little bit changed, Dave?
Absolutely. And I think that anything you really put your heart into should change you afterwards. And I think that I'm really proud of the film. And then specifically, in regards to your question, I think that journey really does come across, where we all were in our place in the world when we created it, and, when we lived it out, and just, it's in there. So.
And we spent a lot of time talking about the ending. I think it was important for us to kind of throw Yakov and the audience into the unknown, where the audience is not really sure where he's going to go, but there's no doubt that he's changed.
And actually, we filmed the ending twice.
We did. It was a big thing. There was a big conversation about what the last line of the movie should be.
And Rafi wanted to do it, and I didn't want to do it. And Rafi was absolutely right, and I'm so happy with how it turned out.
It's nice when a producer has a great idea, right? Yeah.
Oh, I remember that was the only scene that I wasn't on set for, because I had to fly at the time. And then I saw the dailies, and I was like, no, we have to keep. It was
Hanukkah. It was Hanukkah, right?
Yeah, it was.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, the great thing about the ending is that two men are exorcised through one man. And it's pretty complete in a way that you rarely see, particularly in a horror movie. Keith, next, you're stepping into a land that I'm very familiar with, the land of Stephen King. You're going to be doing Firestarter. Tell me about that.
Yeah, no, it's really exciting. It's a book that I had read as a kid. It was, I think, one of my first King novels. I think I was like 10 years old, and I had read Poe. Maybe I'd read Poe in school, and just kind of, there was a sort of deliciousness to reading horror fiction that I just wanted more of. So then I went down the rabbit hole of Lovecraft and the rest of them, Algernon Blackwood, the whole, Weird Tales crew. And then it, obviously ended up at King, where I think a lot of folks do. And I really liked Firestarter because it was it felt non-supernatural, not like The Shining, not like It. it had a very grounded real world aspect to it, of these people in this experiment who just happened to come out with these abilities that are almost more like curses. And so, yeah, when I got offered Firestarter, I jumped at the thought of it, and I thought, wow, yeah, if it's going to be King, that's a great King. And while I like the original 80s film, I felt like, yeah, it's probably a good time for an update of that material. And then I read the script. Yeah. And then I read the script, and the script by Scott Teems, who did the upcoming Halloween Kills. It's just really good. It's just really powerful. And obviously there's not going to be that many connections you can find between the Vigil and Firestarter, but at its core, it's an emotional, visceral film. And that's what I wanted with the Vigil, is about kind of the exploration of this inner space and how the world is warped around it. And it's the same with Firestarter. It's a story of parents and a child with incredible abilities that are also incredibly frightening. And how do you parent a child like that, especially if you're on the run?
Yeah. Questions from the audience. Here's one from Jen Misko. I'd love to hear from Rafi or Keith talk about the choice to subtitle Yiddish but not Hebrew. Rafi, let's throw that in your court.
We talked about that for a while. I think that ultimately, like there's quite a significant amount of Yiddish in the movie, especially a lot of the exposition in the beginning with when Yakov is walking with Reb Shulam down Lee Avenue in Williamsburg. There's a lot of exposition of what we're setting up. We're teaching the audience essentially through dialogue what a shomer is and what the expectations of the night are going to be. So I think that there wasn't a world in which we couldn't subtitle the Yiddish, but I am happy that we chose Yiddish for whenever we believe the character in that world would be speaking Yiddish. The Hebrew, I'm going to let Keith speak on that because he knows exactly what to say on that subject.
Yeah, it was one of those things where I thought, first of all, it would be distracting. Yeah, obviously, when there's subtitles on a screen, you're reading them and you're not maybe taking in the entirety of the image. And I thought I didn't want to distract anybody. I also thought that they would just get it. The guy's praying, we don't need to know what the words of this prayer are. And in a lot of ways, it's inspired directly kind of from my experience with The Exorcist, in that I love The Exorcist, but I don't understand any of the Latin. I don't understand the prayers, but I got it, right? This girl on this bed is in a bad way, and this priest is going to help, exorcise this demon. And whatever it is he's saying is not as important as the fact that he's saying it. So that was the idea here. We don't need to translate the Hebrew. People are going to get it. It's the same with the tefillin. There was no explanation of what he's doing or why he's doing it. You could see the bad version where he's getting the tefillin, when the Miss Litvak gets the tefillin out, and she says to him, "This is tefillin, and it's used for this." And I didn't want any of that sort of stuff to slow the story down. I just wanted to kind of, like Rafi said, just immerse somebody in it. If you're going to be telling the story through this lens, just dive right in, and the audience will figure it out.
There is also a clear distinction. The Hebrew is mostly the prayer in the film, and the English and the Yiddish is mostly the dialogue.
Gotcha. Antonia Roman asks, what has been the response from the Jewish community regarding this film? Dave, you want to take that?
Oh, I don't think I'm qualified to. I'm not really sure. It's been, everything that I've heard back has been really positive. I've heard really kind things about the dialect and the language and the representation of the culture. And my friends that I made during the filming have all had good things to say about it. Some of them are there in Toronto. But other than that, I've had a lot of people reach out from around the world, which has been really amazing. I love to hear from people that the story makes a difference to. And it comes out on Friday, so we'll see.
Yeah. So Rafi, Keith, what feedback have you had from that community?
It's been great, really. When we were going into this, again, we didn't make the movie necessarily for a Jewish audience. We always were very clear, we're making a horror movie first and foremost. That said, we wanted to make sure that if anybody from the Orthodox community went to go see the movie, that they would buy every second of it. There wouldn't be a moment where they're like, that would never happen, or that's not being said correctly, or the rabbis on the wall are not the right rabbis on the wall that would be in that home. So that was all really important to us. So and just to be portrayed, like I said earlier, it just objectively and with empathy as human beings. So the response from the community, because we've been doing quite a lot of, which is probably a first and maybe a last for a lot of us, we've been doing the Jewish Film Festival tour, which is not something I ever thought I would be doing when I came out to LA to make horror movies. And just, that crossover between the Jewish community and the horror community has been so fun. Like all these people who would never watch a movie like The Vigil are watching The Vigil because it's coming through the Jewish Film Festival circuit. And the response has been amazing. Like the amount of times that we've heard, like, I don't like horror movies, but I love The Vigil, has been significant. And that's always like what you want to hear as a horror filmmaker.
That's got to be the most gratifying thing, for the non-genre people to embrace it as much as the genre people.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's been really, and that's the reaction that I've been seeing as well. Is our hope making it, and what I hope we've been seeing is that people who are non-Jews appreciate it kind of for what it is as a horror film, but also a kind of spiritual or emotional film. And if you happen to be Jewish, there's more layers to kind of even dig into, because there's a lot of very subtle stuff that if you're Jewish you'll get and you'll pick up on, which hopefully is kind of enriching. And yeah, I've seen the same sort of thing of folks saying, I don't like horror, I don't like being scared, and this did scare me, and then I got something out of it.
Well, David Goldstein says, I'm sorry that Lynn Cohen, who played Mrs. Whitback, passed away almost exactly a year ago. Did she get to see the movie? She was extraordinary.
Yeah, she really, really was extraordinary. I feel like she had seen it maybe around TIFF. She wasn't able to be at TIFF, but Lynn was a powerhouse. She really, really was. Tiny lady, but just when she stepped on set, it was just boom. She was there, and she really. It was also a personal film for her in that, the dialect she's using, the voice she's using is her own grandmother. It's influenced directly from her own history. And she really connected with that. The other fun piece of it is she really liked playing the creepy old lady. I mean, there's a certain, even though Miss Litvak is a very, empathetic, sympathetic character in terms of the audience understands that she's been trapped in this house too. But she also liked the idea that when Yakov first arrives, like, this lady's creepy. She is upstairs. Who knows what she's doing? She's off her rocker, so to speak. So we don't know what's real. And I liked the idea of getting a character like Yakov in a house where the only other person, have no idea if what they're saying is true or not. And in fact, she's only scaring him more. And I thought that's a great sort of setup. And Lynn loved that aspect of it.
Dave, what was the most challenging scene for you to play?
Oof. Wow. I've been asked that question a few times, and it's really difficult to come up with, because no, it's not that at all. It's a really good question, but I still don't have a good answer for it.
Well, there's a rainbow of colors in this performance, and I imagine all of them were a challenge, and all of them were incredibly gratifying because it comes off so well. But I just was wondering if there was something in particular. Maybe it wasn't the most challenging, but maybe the most memorable, or where you really felt you achieved something you didn't expect.
Wow.
Did I make it harder?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yakov, I can easily and without hesitation say, was the most challenging undertaking of my artistic career, and in a lot of ways in my life. It pushed me to my limits, and I mean that in the best way possible. So there were so many various challenges, building the world, diving into Keith's world, accomplishing it under quick circumstances in the independent landscape, the accent, the languages, the emotion, the personal journey that's necessary in understanding the religious journey that Yakov's on, or the lack thereof, the community. I can't pinpoint a particular scene, because because so much of the film was Yakov on his own journey, it really kind of was this continual conversation that Keith and I were on, where it was just new challenges every day. And living in this mindset of Yakov, who is struggling with his mental health, who's struggling with his ability to survive and make the choices that he needs to do to survive. And then every day was this new challenge. And that was the fun part. So I can't say that there was one scene that was more difficult, because when we were actually filming, that was the life, that was the love, that was the excitement and the fun. It was the work leading up to it and the kind of delving into that loneliness and that despair, the dark night of the soul, as Keith calls it. That was the difficult part.
Well, Dave Davis, Keith Thomas, Raphael Margules, thank you so much for a movie that is something to be really proud of, something that I've seen twice and I will be seeing again, and for making it public with everybody at Overlook and Brooklyn Horror Film Festival and Vidiots and everybody who's been involved in this. So thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thank you.
so much for having us.
All right. Take care. Thanks,
That was
everybody.
a lot of fun. Thanks again.
Bye-bye.